The hammer came down on the makeshift podium with a crack that echoed through the dusty saloon, and Beatrice Emmett felt her entire world shatter into 1,000 pieces like glass hitting stone floor. It was June 1872, and Placerville, California had seen plenty of desperate times during its gold rush days. But this particular afternoon marked something darker than most folks cared to witness. The air inside the Gold Strike Saloon hung thick with cigar smoke and shame, as men gathered around to watch a father sell his own daughter to settle debts he had no other way to pay. Thomas Emmett stood in the corner, his face buried in his trembling hands, unable to watch what his addiction to poker and whiskey had wrought upon his only child. Beatrice stood on that raised platform in her best dress, a faded blue calico that had seen better years, her hands clasped so tightly before her that her knuckles had gone white as bone. She was 22 years old, with hair the color of autumn chestnuts that fell in waves past her shoulders and eyes that held both defiance and terror in equal measure. She had always known her father's gambling would lead them to ruin, but never in her darkest nightmares had she imagined this particular hell. $500, called out a voice from the back, belonging to Marcus Hale, a cattle rancher known for working his hands near to death and paying them barely enough to survive. Beatrice felt bile rise in her throat. 600, countered another man, this one she recognized as the owner of the textile mill, a widower twice her age with hands that had touched her shoulder once at the general store in a way that made her skin crawl. The auctioneer, a weasel-faced man named Thornton who ran the saloon and held her father's debts, grinned like a coyote eyeing a wounded rabbit. Do I hear 700? The girl can cook, clean, and her father assures me she is unspoiled. A fine investment for any man looking for a wife or help around his property. Beatrice wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there while men bartered for her life like she was livestock at the county fair. But 4 of Thornton's men stood guard at the exits, arms crossed and pistols visible at their hips. Her father owed $3,000, a sum so astronomical it might as well have been $1 million. This auction was meant to pay at least part of that debt, and Thornton had made it abundantly clear that if Thomas could not settle his accounts, he would be found face down in the river before the week was out. 700, the mill owner said, his voice oily with satisfaction. 800, Marcus Hale shot back, standing now, his bulk casting a shadow across half the room. Beatrice closed her eyes and thought of her mother, dead these past 5 years from consumption, buried in the hillside cemetery overlooking the town. What would a leaner Emmett think if she could see what had become of her family? The thought brought tears that Beatrice refused to let fall. She would not give these men the satisfaction of seeing her break. $3,000. The voice cut through the room like a knife through butter, clear and sharp and utterly unexpected. Every head turned toward the entrance where a man stood silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun streaming through the swinging doors. He stepped inside, his boots making solid sounds against the wooden floor, and Beatrice found herself staring at someone she had never seen before in Placerville. He was tall, perhaps 26 or 27 years old, with broad shoulders that filled out his dust-covered shirt and sun-darkened skin that spoke of years working outdoors. His hair was the color of sand, slightly too long and curling at his collar, and his eyes were an unusual shade of gray-blue that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore a gun belt slung low on his hips, but his hands hung relaxed at his sides as he walked further into the room. There was something in the way he carried himself that suggested capability, the kind of man who knew exactly what he could do and felt no need to prove it to anyone. 3,000, Thornton repeated, his greedy eyes lighting up like lanterns. That would settle the entire debt. That is my offer, the stranger said, his voice level and calm. I will pay $3,000 for the girl's freedom, which will clear Thomas Emmett's debt in full. Once that debt is paid, she will be free to make her own choices, as any person should be. The room erupted in murmurs and protests. Marcus Hale stood up so fast his chair fell backward with a clatter. Now hold on just a minute. You cannot just walk in here and I can and I am, the stranger interrupted, his eyes never leaving Thornton's face. You said this was an auction. I have made my bid. Do you have rules about who can participate, or is this legitimate business? Thornton's face twisted as he calculated the angles. $3,000 would clear Emmett's debt entirely, which meant he could not bleed the man for more money in the future. On the other hand, $3,000 in cash right now was better than the maybe payments he might squeeze out over time, especially if Emmett ended up dead or run out of town. Greed won out over long-term scheming. $3,000 it is, Thornton said, bringing down his hammer with finality. Sold to the gentleman at the door. I will take payment now, if you please. The stranger reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather pouch that clinked with the unmistakable sound of gold coins. He walked to Thornton's table and began counting out the payment while the entire saloon watched in stunned silence. Beatrice could hardly breathe. Who was this man? Why would he pay such an enormous sum for someone he did not even know? When the payment was complete and Thornton had verified every last coin, the stranger turned to face Beatrice for the first time. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were kind. He walked to the platform and held out his hand to help her down the steps. My name is Benjamin Kane, he said quietly, so only she could hear. I am sorry you had to endure this. You are free now. You owe me nothing. Beatrice took his hand because her legs were shaking so badly she feared she might fall otherwise. His palm was calloused and warm, steady against her trembling fingers. When her feet touched the floor, she looked up at him and whispered, I do not understand. There is nothing to understand, Benjamin said. No human being should be bought or sold. I had the means to stop this, so I did. Before Beatrice could respond, her father pushed through the crowd and grabbed her shoulders. Beatrice, sweetheart, I am so sorry. I never meant for it to come to this. I swear I will make it up to you. I will never gamble again, I promise. Get away from her. Benjamin's voice had gone cold as Winter Creek water, and his hand had moved to hover near his pistol. You sold your own daughter to pay for your weakness. You do not get to touch her now. Thomas Emmett stumbled backward, his face crumpling. She is my daughter. She is a grown woman who you betrayed in the worst way possible, Benjamin said. If you value your life, you will walk away and think long and hard about the choices that brought you here. Thornton stepped forward, his payment secured and his mood suddenly jovial. Now, no need for violence. The debt is paid. Everyone got what they wanted, not everyone, Benjamin interrupted, his eyes sweeping the room with barely concealed disgust. Every man here who came to bid on a human being should be ashamed. This is not civilization. This is barbarism dressed up in legal paperwork. He turned to Beatrice and gentled his voice. You have belongings you need to collect. She nodded mutely, still trying to process everything that had happened in the last 5 minutes. At my father's house. Just a small bag. Then we will get it and leave this place, Benjamin said. He looked at Thornton one more time. The debt is cleared. If you go near Thomas Emmett or his daughter again, I will hear about it and I will come back. Do we understand each other? Thornton raised his hands in mock surrender, though his eyes glittered with resentment. Clear as crystal, friend. The debt is paid, we have no further business. Benjamin kept his body between Beatrice and the crowd as they walked toward the exit. She could feel dozens of eyes on her back, could hear the whispers starting already. By tomorrow, everyone in Placerville would have a version of this story, each one more scandalous than the last. The thought made her stomach turn, but Benjamin's solid presence beside her kept her walking forward. The afternoon sun felt too bright after the dimness of the saloon, and Beatrice had to squint against it. The main street of Placerville stretched before them, busy with the usual afternoon traffic of wagons, horses, and people going about their business, completely unaware of the drama that had just unfolded in the Gold Strike Saloon. "Where are you staying?" Benjamin asked as they walked. "A boarding house on 3rd Street, Beatrice managed, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. "My father has a room there. I have been working at the bakery to help pay rent." They walked in silence for a block before Beatrice found her voice again. "Why did you do that?" $3,000 is a fortune." Benjamin was quiet for a moment, his eyes scanning the street ahead. "I spent 3 years in Texas after the war," he finally said. "I saw things there, people being traded and used, that made me sick to my soul. When I heard what was happening in that saloon, I could not walk by. Money can be earned again. A person's dignity and freedom are worth more than gold." His words settled into Beatrice's chest, strange and warming. She had lived her whole life in Placerville, had known most of these people since childhood, and not one of them had stepped forward to stop what was happening. This stranger, this Benjamin Kane, had walked into town and paid a fortune simply because it was the right thing to do. "Where will you go now?" she asked quietly. "I was passing through on my way north to Oregon," Benjamin said. "I have a claim on some land near Portland that I am planning to settle. I was going to stop here for supplies and then continue on." "Oh," Beatrice said, and felt something sink in her chest that she could not quite name. Of course he was just passing through. Why would he stay? He had done his good deed, and now he would ride off into whatever new life awaited him, and she would be left here in Placerville with the smoking ruins of her reputation, and the father who had betrayed her. They reached the boarding house, a 3-story structure badly in need of fresh paint. Beatrice led Benjamin up the narrow stairs to the 2nd floor, to the cramped room she had shared with her father for the past 2 years. Thomas was not there, probably still at the saloon drowning his guilt in whatever whiskey someone would front him on credit. Her belongings did not take long to pack. A change of clothes, her mother's Bible and locket, a hairbrush, and the small stash of coins she had hidden in her mattress from her bakery wages. Everything that remained of her life fit into a single canvas bag. Benjamin waited in the doorway, his eyes taking in the sparse room with its peeling wallpaper and single window that overlooked the alley. "This is where you have been living." "My father's gambling did not leave money for better," Beatrice said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "I have been trying to save enough to leave, to go to San Francisco maybe and find work, but every time I got close, he would find the money and lose it at cards." She turned to face Benjamin, her bag clutched in her hands. "What happens now? Where am I supposed to go?" Benjamin studied her for a long moment, and she could see him weighing options in his mind. Finally, he said, "I meant what I said in the saloon. You owe me nothing. I will stake you enough money to get to San Francisco or wherever you want to start over. You are free to choose your own path." "And if I do not want to be alone?" The words came out before Beatrice could stop them, raw and honest. "I have no family, no friends who will want to associate with me after today. Everyone will think I am ruined goods, no matter what actually happened. I have been working at the bakery since I was 16, and I am a good cook. I can clean and mend and work hard. If you are going to Oregon to settle land, you will need help." Benjamin's expression shifted to something she could not quite read. "Beatrice, I am not asking for charity," she said quickly. "I am offering fair work for fair wages and a chance to leave this place behind. Unless you have a wife waiting in Oregon who would object." "No wife," Benjamin said quietly. "No family at all, actually. My parents died of fever when I was 19, and I have been on my own since." "Then we are both alone," Beatrice said. "Maybe we could be alone together, at least until we get to Oregon and I can figure out what comes next." Benjamin looked at her for a long moment, and Beatrice forced herself to meet his eyes without flinching. She knew what she was asking was unconventional, bordering on scandalous, but her entire life had just been upended in the worst possible way. Conventional had not served her well. Maybe it was time to choose a different path. "All right," Benjamin finally said. "We leave in the morning. I have a wagon and supplies already packed. It is a long journey to Oregon, several months if we make good time. If you are certain this is what you want." "I am certain I want out of Placerville," Beatrice said firmly. "The rest I will figure out along the way." They spent that night in separate rooms at a different boarding house on the edge of town, away from the gossip and the stares. Beatrice lay awake in the narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the town through her window and trying to process the fact that her entire life had changed in the span of a single afternoon. This time yesterday, she had been worried about whether the bread would rise properly at the bakery. Now she was preparing to leave everything she had ever known to travel across half the country with a man she had met only hours ago. It should have terrified her. Perhaps it did, a little. But more than fear, she felt a strange sense of possibility, as if her life had been a door stuck closed for years, and Benjamin Kane had kicked it open to reveal a horizon she had never imagined she might reach. Morning came too quickly and too slowly all at once. Beatrice dressed in her most practical clothes and braided her hair tightly. She had left a brief note for her father at the old boarding house, though she did not know if he would even be sober enough to read it. The note said simply that she was leaving Placerville and he should not try to find her. She signed it without love, just her name, because that was all the forgiveness she had in her heart right now. Benjamin was waiting on the street with a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 strong horses. The wagon bed was packed with supplies covered by canvas, leaving room for passengers to sit on the bench seat up front. He helped Beatrice up, his hand steady on her elbow, and then climbed up beside her and took the reins. "Ready?" he asked. Beatrice looked back at Placerville one last time, at the buildings she had known her whole life, the street she had walked every day to work, the cemetery on the hill where her mother rested. Then she turned forward, toward the open road leading north, and nodded. "Ready." The wagon lurched into motion, and they left Placerville behind. The first few days of travel passed in relative silence. They fell into an easy routine. Benjamin drove during the day while Beatrice sat beside him, watching the landscape change from the rocky hills around Placerville to the broader valleys further north. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat simple meals of bread, cheese, and dried meat. In the evenings, Benjamin would make camp while Beatrice prepared dinner over the fire, using the supplies he had packed and proving that she had not exaggerated her cooking skills. Benjamin was not much of a talker, Beatrice learned, but he was observant and considerate. He always made sure she had enough to eat, that her bedroll was positioned on the smoothest ground, that the fire was built up enough to keep her warm through the night, but not so large as to attract unwanted attention. He slept on the opposite side of the fire, and never once made her feel uncomfortable or unsafe. On the 4th day, as they followed a rough trail through pine forests that smelled of sap and earth, Beatrice finally broke the comfortable silence that had developed between them. "Can I ask you something?" Benjamin glanced over at her, his hand steady on the reins. "Of course. Where did you get $3,000 in gold coins? That is more money than most people see in a lifetime." He was quiet for a moment, and Beatrice worried she had overstepped. But then he spoke, his voice thoughtful. "I fought in the war on the Union side. After it ended, I drifted south into Texas and got work as a scout for the Army. I saved my wages for 3 years, barely spent anything. Then I heard about homestead land opening up in Oregon Territory, good fertile land for anyone willing to work it. I decided that was what I wanted, a place of my own, something permanent after years of moving around." "And you spent your entire savings on a stranger," Beatrice said softly. "Not quite all of it," Benjamin admitted with a slight smile. "I kept back enough to get us to Oregon and start building. But yes, most of it went to buying your freedom." "Why?" The question burst out of Beatrice with more force than she intended. "I know you said it was the right thing to do, but people walk past the right thing every day. Why did you actually do it?" Benjamin pulled the wagon to a stop, giving the horses a rest. He turned to face Beatrice directly, and she was struck again by how clear his eyes were, like water over stone. "My mother was sold once," he said quietly. "Before the war, down south. She was not born into slavery, but she was mixed race, and when my father died of cholera, some men claimed she had been property all along and sold her at auction. I was just a boy, maybe 10 years old. I stood there and watched men bid on my own mother while I could do nothing to stop it." Beatrice felt her throat tighten. "What happened?" "A Quaker minister bought her and immediately freed her," Benjamin said. "He gave us money to travel north and start over. He said no person should ever be owned by another, that it was against God and nature. My mother never forgot that kindness, and she made sure I never forgot it either. She used to say, 'Benjamin, when you have the power to help someone and you choose not to, that is a sin you will carry forever.' That is why you helped me," Beatrice said, understanding flooding through her. "I stood in that saloon and saw you on that platform, and all I could see was my mother's face from 20 years ago," Benjamin said. "I had the power to stop it this time. How could I live with myself if I just walked away?" Without thinking, Beatrice reached out and took his hand. "Your mother raised a good man, Benjamin Kane." His fingers closed around hers, warm and calloused. "I try to be. Does not always work out, but I try." They sat there for a moment, hands clasped, something shifting in the air between them. Then Benjamin cleared his throat and gently released her hand, taking up the reins again. But Beatrice noticed that the silence between them felt different now, charged with a new understanding. As they continued north, following trails that wound through mountains and valleys, past rivers swollen with snowmelt and meadows dotted with wildflowers, Beatrice and Benjamin talked more. She told him about her mother, about growing up in Placerville during the gold rush years, about her dreams of seeing the ocean someday. He told her about the war, though carefully and with obvious editing of the worst parts, about his years in Texas, about his plans for the Oregon land. They passed through small settlements and avoided larger towns, camping under the stars more often than not. Benjamin taught Beatrice how to handle the rifle he kept in the wagon, insisting that anyone traveling through wild country needed to know how to defend themselves. She proved to be a decent shot, much to her own surprise, and the pride in Benjamin's eyes when she hit the target made something warm bloom in her chest. 3 weeks into their journey, they camped beside a creek that sang over smooth stones, the water so clear Beatrice could see fish darting in the shallows. She had washed their clothes that afternoon and hung them on bushes to dry, and now she sat by the fire working on mending a tear in Benjamin's shirt while he cleaned his pistol on the other side of the flames. "Can I ask you something now?" Benjamin said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Fair is fair," Beatrice replied with a small smile. "What do you want to do when we get to Oregon?" he asked, his eyes on his work but his tone curious. "You said you wanted to figure things out. Have you been figuring?" Beatrice set down her mending and looked at the fire. "Honestly, I have been trying not to think too hard about it because it frightens me. I have never had real choices before. My father made all the decisions and they were usually bad ones. Now suddenly, I have all this freedom and no idea what to do with it. What did you dream about before?" Benjamin asked gently. "When you were a girl, what did you think your life would be?" The question hit something tender in Beatrice's chest. "I used to think I would get married, have children, live a normal life. But watching my father destroy our family cured me of romantic notions. Then I just hoped I could save enough money to support myself, maybe open a bakery of my own someday. Small dreams, safe dreams. And now I do not know," Beatrice admitted. "The world feels bigger than it did a month ago. Maybe that is good, maybe it is terrifying, perhaps both." Benjamin looked up at her then, his expression serious. "You are brave, Beatrice, braver than you know. Most people never question the life they are handed. You are choosing to build something new." "I did not have much choice," she said with a bitter laugh. "You had a choice in that saloon," Benjamin countered. "You could have let yourself break. You could have given up. But you stood there with your head high and your eyes full of fire, and when I offered you a way out, you took it. That is courage." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them away. "I am not sure it was courage, maybe just stubbornness." "Sometimes they are the same thing," Benjamin said with a slight smile. He set aside his pistol and stood, walking around the fire to sit beside her. Not too close, still respecting her space, but near enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "I want you to know," he said carefully, "that when we get to Oregon, you truly are free to do whatever you choose. If you want to stay and help build the homestead, you will have a place for as long as you want it. If you want me to take you to Portland or wherever else, I will do that. No obligations, no expectations." Beatrice turned to look at him, at this man who had upended his entire life to save hers. In the firelight, his face was all strong angles and shadows, but his eyes were gentle. Something had been growing between them over these weeks of travel, something Beatrice had been afraid to name because naming it made it real and real things could hurt you. "What if I want to stay?" she asked quietly. "Not out of obligation, but because I want to." Benjamin's breath caught just slightly. "Then I would be happy to have you, even though we barely know each other. I know you work hard and do not complain, even when the trail is rough," Benjamin said. "I know you are kind to the horses and you laugh at my terrible jokes. I know you are strong and brave and you make the best biscuits I have ever eaten. I know that when you look at the mountains, you get this expression on your face like you are seeing something holy. Is that not knowing someone? I know you paid $3,000 for a stranger's freedom," Beatrice said softly. "I know you sleep on the hard ground so I can have the better spot. I know you check the wagon wheels every morning even though they are fine. I know you have nightmares sometimes and try to hide them. I know your hands are gentle even though you have lived a hard life. Is that not knowing someone?" They sat there looking at each other, the fire crackling between them and the creek singing its endless song. And Beatrice felt something settle in her chest like a bird finally finding a place to land. "I think I might be falling in love with you," she whispered, the words frightening and exhilarating all at once. Benjamin reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hand. "I think I fell in love with you the moment you looked at me in that saloon like you were daring me to see you as more than a victim. I have been falling ever since." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet and full of promise. Beatrice had been kissed before, clumsy stolen moments behind the bakery with boys she thought she might marry, but this was different. This felt like coming home to a place she had never been. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "We are probably crazy," Beatrice said, her forehead resting against his. "Probably," Benjamin agreed. "But I have done worse things than fall in love with a beautiful, brave woman who makes excellent biscuits." She laughed and kissed him again, and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns while the fire burned down to embers. The rest of the journey passed in a haze of growing intimacy and deepening love. They held hands as Benjamin drove the wagon. They stayed up late by the fire talking about everything and nothing. They stole kisses when they stopped to rest the horses. Beatrice had spent so many years believing love was a trap, a weakness that could be used against you, but with Benjamin it felt like strength, like possibility. They crossed into Oregon territory in late August, the landscape turning to rolling hills and thick forests that seemed to stretch forever. Benjamin's land claim was in the Willamette Valley, a region known for its fertile soil and mild climate. When they finally arrived at the property in early September, Beatrice understood why Benjamin had been willing to spend his savings on it. The land spread out in gentle slopes, a creek running through one corner and thick stands of timber perfect for building. The soil was rich and dark, and wildflowers grew in profusion around the edges of the clearing where someone had once started to build a cabin before abandoning the project. The bones of that old structure remained, enough to give them a head start. "It is beautiful," Beatrice breathed, standing beside the wagon and taking it all in. "It will be hard work," Benjamin warned, but she could hear the excitement in his voice. "We will have to finish the cabin before winter, clear fields, plant crops. It will be years before it is really established." "We will do it together," Beatrice said, taking his hand. "If you will have me." Benjamin turned to her, and the love in his eyes made her breath catch. "Beatrice Emmett, I know we have not done things in any kind of conventional order, but I cannot imagine doing this without you. I cannot imagine my life without you in it." He went down on one knee right there in the tall grass, still holding her hand. "Will you marry me?" Beatrice felt tears stream down her face, but these were good tears, happy tears. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." He stood and kissed her deeply, and Beatrice thought about how strange life was, how a single day could destroy everything you knew and another day could build something better than you dreamed possible. 2 months ago, she had been auctioned like property. Now she was standing on her own land with a man she loved, planning a future she chose for herself. They married 2 weeks later in the nearest town, a small community called Silver Creek about 10 miles from their property. The ceremony was simple, performed by a circuit preacher in front of a handful of witnesses they had just met. Beatrice wore a simple dress she had sewn herself from fabric Benjamin bought as a wedding gift, and she carried wildflowers she had picked that morning. Benjamin wore his best shirt and looked so handsome it made her heart ache. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Benjamin kissed her like she was something precious beyond measure, and Beatrice felt the last pieces of her broken past finally fall away. She was Beatrice Kane now, and she was choosing this life with open eyes and a full heart. They spent the fall and winter working on the cabin, expanding and improving the structure until it was a proper home with a bedroom, a main room with a stone fireplace Benjamin built himself, and a kitchen area that made Beatrice clap her hands with delight. They chinked the logs against the wind and built furniture from timber they cut themselves. Benjamin proved to be skilled with his hands, crafting a bed frame and table and chairs that were simple but sturdy. The work was hard, harder than anything Beatrice had done before, but it was satisfying in a way bakery work had never been. Every log they placed, every nail they drove, was building something that belonged to them. Nobody could take this away or gamble it away or sell it to pay debts. This was theirs. Winter in the Willamette Valley was mild compared to the mountains, but still cold and wet, with rain that seemed to fall for weeks at a time. They spent those long evenings by the fire, Benjamin teaching Beatrice to read the maps and books he owned, Beatrice teaching Benjamin the songs her mother had sung to her as a child. They talked about their plans for spring planting, about the chickens they would get and the garden Beatrice wanted to start. And at night, in the bed Benjamin had built, they learned each other in the way of newlyweds, with tenderness and passion and growing confidence. Beatrice had been so afraid for so long that love meant losing yourself, but with Benjamin, she felt more herself than ever. He treated her as an equal partner, asking her opinion on decisions, listening when she had ideas, never dismissing her thoughts as unimportant. Spring came with an explosion of green, and they threw themselves into clearing fields and planting crops. Benjamin taught Beatrice how to handle the plow, and though the work was back-breaking, she felt proud when she looked at the straight furrows she had made. They planted wheat and corn and vegetables, and Beatrice started her garden near the house with seeds she had bought in Silver Creek. By summer, the homestead was starting to look established. The crops were growing well, the garden was producing more vegetables than they could eat, and they had acquired chickens and a milk cow from a neighboring homesteader who was moving back east. Beatrice had made friends with some of the other women in the area, and she found she liked this life, liked the independence and the hard work, and the satisfaction of building something from nothing. On a warm evening in July, almost exactly a year after Benjamin had bought her freedom in that Placerville saloon, Beatrice stood in the doorway of their cabin watching him work in the fields. The setting sun painted everything gold, and she rested her hand on her belly where their first child was growing, still too early to show but real enough that she and Benjamin had whispered about it in the dark just last night. Benjamin looked up from his work and saw her watching. He waved and she waved back, and the smile he gave her could have lit up the whole valley. He set down his tools and walked toward the cabin, and Beatrice went to meet him halfway through the yard. "Everything all right?" he asked, pulling her into his arms. "Everything is perfect," she said, and meant it with her whole heart. "I was just thinking about how different my life is now, how happy I am." Benjamin kissed her forehead. "I think about that too sometimes, about how close we came to never meeting. If I had passed through Placerville a day earlier or later, if I had not heard about the auction." "But you did," Beatrice said firmly. "You were exactly where you needed to be, and so was I. Maybe that is fate or God or just luck, but I choose to believe we were meant to find each other." "I like that," Benjamin said, his hand moving to rest over hers on her belly. "I like the idea that some things are meant to be." They stood there in the golden light, holding each other and their unborn child, and Beatrice thought about all the pain and fear and uncertainty that had brought her to this moment. She would not wish that suffering on anyone, but she also could not regret a path that had led her here, to this man, to this life, to this love. The baby came in early March, a squalling red-faced boy with his father's gray-blue eyes and a surprisingly full head of dark hair. They named him Thomas, after Beatrice's father, because forgiveness was a gift you gave yourself as much as the other person. Beatrice had written to her father once, a year ago, telling him she was safe and married and happy. He had never written back, and she did not know if he was alive or dead or somewhere in between. But naming her son after him felt like closing a circle, like saying she had survived what he had done to her and built something good anyway. Benjamin was a devoted father, rising in the night to walk with Thomas when he cried, singing to him in a surprisingly good voice, building a cradle with his own hands that he carved with intricate designs. Watching him with their son made Beatrice fall in love with him all over again. The homestead continued to grow and prosper. They added on to the cabin as their family grew, a second son named William arriving 2 years after Thomas, and then a daughter they called Alina after Beatrice's mother. The wheat fields expanded, and Benjamin built a barn for the growing number of animals. They hired help during harvest season, and Beatrice started selling her baked goods in Silver Creek, her bread becoming famous enough that people would place orders weeks in advance. By their 10th anniversary, they had built something remarkable. The homestead was thriving, their children were healthy and happy, and their love had only deepened with time. They had arguments, of course, and difficult days when the crops failed or money was tight or the children were sick. But they faced everything together, partners in every sense of the word. On their anniversary night, after the children were asleep and the farm was quiet, Benjamin and Beatrice sat on the porch he had built, looking out over the land they had made their own. Stars filled the sky like diamonds scattered on black velvet, and the air smelled of summer grass and the roses Beatrice had planted along the fence. "You ever think about that day in Placerville?" Benjamin asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Sometimes," Beatrice admitted. "But it feels like it happened to a different person. That girl who stood on that platform was so scared, so certain her life was over. She could not have imagined this." "I think she was braver than she knew," Benjamin said. "She survived, and she chose to keep surviving, and she built something beautiful." "We built something beautiful," Beatrice corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you." "We make a good team," Benjamin agreed. He kissed her temple, a gesture so familiar after 10 years that it felt like coming home. "I would do it all again, you know. Pay $3,000, travel across 3 territories, build this life from scratch, all of it, just to end up right here with you." Beatrice turned in his arms and kissed him properly. "You are still the best man I have ever known, Benjamin Kane. And you are still the bravest woman I ever met, Beatrice Kane." They sat there together as the stars wheeled overhead, 2 people who had found each other in the worst moment and built a lifetime of best moments. Inside the cabin, their children slept safely in the beds their father had made with his own hands. In the fields, crops grew in soil they had worked together. All around them stood the evidence of what love and determination could build when 2 people chose each other, day after day, year after year. Beatrice thought about the girl she had been, auctioned off like property, terrified and alone. She thought about the man who had walked through those saloon doors with $3,000 and a good heart. She thought about every mile they had traveled, every log they had placed, every meal they had shared, every child they had brought into the world. And she knew with absolute certainty that she would not change a single thing. The pain had led her to Benjamin, and Benjamin had led her to this life, and this life was exactly what she had been searching for without even knowing it. "What are you thinking about?" Benjamin asked, ever attentive to her moods. "I am thinking about how sometimes the worst day of your life can lead to the best things," Beatrice said. "I am thinking about how grateful I am that you walked into that saloon. I am thinking about how much I love you and how lucky I am to have built this life with you." Benjamin's arms tightened around her. "The luck was all mine, Beatrice. Every single bit of it." As they sat there under the stars, surrounded by the life they had built and the love they had chosen, Beatrice felt a peace deeper than any she had known. The past could not hurt her anymore. The future stretched before them bright with possibility. And the present, this perfect moment, was everything she had never dared to dream. Years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow as years always do. They lost a winter crop to early frost but recovered. Benjamin's horse broke a leg and had to be put down, and he mourned like he had lost a friend, which in many ways he had. Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved books. William was all wild energy and laughter, and Eleanor had her mother's determination and her father's kind heart. When Beatrice was 37, she gave birth to twins, 2 more boys they named James and Henry. The cabin had to be expanded again, and Benjamin joked that pretty soon they would need a whole second house. But Beatrice could hear the pride in his voice when he talked about their growing family, and she knew he was as happy as she was with their loud, chaotic, love-filled home. The homestead became one of the most successful in the Willamette Valley. Benjamin's wheat was known for its quality, and Beatrice's bakery business had grown to the point where she employed 2 local women to help with production. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable and secure, and that was more than enough. On an autumn evening when Beatrice was 43, she and Benjamin sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was 21 now, courting a girl from Silver Creek and talking about claiming his own land nearby. William at 19 was considering joining the railroad crews heading east. Eleanor at 16 was teaching at the local school and showing no interest in marriage yet, much to Beatrice's secret delight. The twins, at 6 years old, were wrestling in the grass like puppies. "We did good, did we not?" Benjamin said, gray now threading through his sandy hair but his eyes still that clear gray-blue Beatrice loved. "We did better than good," Beatrice said, taking his hand. "We built exactly what we were meant to build." "Do you ever regret it?" Benjamin asked. "Leaving Placerville, marrying a stranger, spending your whole life working this land." Beatrice looked at him, at the man who had saved her and loved her and built a life with her, and she smiled. "Not for a single second. You gave me everything, Benjamin. Freedom, love, a home, a family. You gave me myself. How could I ever regret that?" "You gave me just as much," Benjamin said softly. "Before you, I was just drifting, trying to build something to fill the emptiness. You made it all mean something. You made me want to be the man you saw when you looked at me." They kissed there on the porch, middle-aged and work-worn and more in love than they had been even in those early heady days. Their children groaned dramatically at the sight of their parents kissing, and Beatrice laughed against Benjamin's lips. "We are embarrassing the children," she said. "Good," Benjamin replied. "Let them see what real love looks like." As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Beatrice reflected on the strange and wonderful journey her life had taken. She had been sold like property and bought like cattle, but she had risen from that degradation to build something beautiful. She had been terrified and alone, but she had found courage and partnership. She had lost everything, but she had gained so much more. The girl who had stood on that auction platform 22 years ago could never have imagined this life, this love, this home. But that girl had survived, had chosen to keep surviving, and had found a man who saw her worth when others saw only her price. Benjamin Kane had paid $3,000 for her freedom, but what he had really given her was priceless. The chance to choose her own life, to love and be loved in return, to build something lasting and good. And she had taken that chance and turned it into a lifetime of joy. As darkness fell and Benjamin called the children inside for dinner, Beatrice looked one more time at the land they had tamed and the home they had built. She thought about all the days and years ahead, about grandchildren she would someday hold, about growing old beside the man who had saved her. And she smiled, because she knew with absolute certainty that every struggle, every hardship, every moment of doubt had been worth it. This was the life she had chosen, the love she had chosen, and she would choose it again and again and again forever. Inside the cabin, her family waited, warm and bright and full of laughter. Benjamin took her hand and pulled her through the doorway, into the light and warmth and love they had created together. And Beatrice Kane, formerly Beatrice Emmett, once a girl auctioned in a saloon and now a woman who knew exactly who she was and what she was worth, stepped across the threshold into the rest of her beautifully chosen life.